Welcome back to Face the Nation. We turn now to Republican Senator Roger Marshall, who joins us this morning from Wichita, Kansas. Welcome to Face the Nation. So,
Margaret, great to be with you. I know it's going to be a great discussion.
Yeah, I know you were an OBGYN in practice for decades before you ran for office. This past week, the HHS secretary underwent intense questioning from both Democratic lawmakers and some of your fellow Republicans who were also doctors. Take a listen.
Secretary Kennedy, in your confirmation hearings, you promised to uphold the highest standards for vaccines. Since then, I've grown deeply concerned.
I would say effectively we're denying people vaccine.
I mean, that's the Republican whip, and that is the chair of the committee, Bill Cassidy. Why do you think they're off base in their concern?
Look, President Trump chose Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be a disruptor to the CDC, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's focused on making the CDC more transparent, to make it more trustworthy right now. Right now, Americans don't trust the CDC, so he is literally turning that place upside down. I respect what my colleagues are saying, but I think that this whole issue today, or in that meeting, was about vaccines. In my humble opinion, not every person needs every vaccine. And I don't think there's many children out there that need 76 jabs by the time they're old enough to vote. But before you label me a non-vaxxer person, look, I've raised money for polio vaccinations. The MMR is a great vaccine. It saved thousands of lives. Vaccines overall have saved hundreds of millions of lives, but not every person needs every vaccine, and we just want to empower parents and the doctors to make great decisions.
Okay, I just want to unpack a few things you said there, and because we want to be very careful in this very heated environment. When you say you have a problem with trusting the CDC, it was just a few weeks ago, a gunman walked onto the CDC campus in Atlanta and shot the place up. Do you care to respond to that? And do you think that we need to be careful when we are discussing the CDC and public health officials right now?
Well, look, of course, I condemn that shooting, but the lack of confidence in the CDC goes back to what the CDC did during COVID. They misguided us, maybe lied to us even, about the origins of COVID and how to treat it as well. And the vaccine, they overpromised what the vaccine could do as well. So that's where the distrust is. And now Bobby Kennedy's in there trying to clean up that distrust and trying to give American parents and grandparents and the doctors the right information, transparent information to make good decisions.
Okay, just before we talk about other vaccines specific to COVID and what you just said, with the CDC, the pandemic was during the Trump administration. It began during the Trump administration, and Operation Warp Speed was a presidential directive by Trump, which some of your fellow Republicans say he deserves the Nobel Prize for because it stopped the pandemic. So did you trust the CDC and Operation Warp Speed under President Trump, or are you saying you don't think the president deserves the prize for that shot?
Yeah, look, President Trump absolutely deserves a Nobel Prize. That vaccine saved millions of lives.
Okay,
but it's such
you
a
just
different time.
said
That's
something
what
that sounded very contradictory to that.
I disagree with you. I think it's such a different time today than it was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we had a novel virus. None of us had any immunity to it. It was a strange virus made in a lab in Wuhan, China. But today, on average, Americans have had COVID 5 times. We now have natural immunity to it, and not everybody needs the vaccine. So both things can be true. And that's why when you have people that don't understand science, that don't understand medicine, why they don't get it. It was a different day then than it is today.
Okay, but people do understand that when they go into their pharmacy and have a problem getting a shot, because in many states they are now told they need to go back and get a prescription, that the effect here of the Kennedy policies are making it more difficult, even if they fall into categories where they should be able to get a shot. You would acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're making this way too complicated. That look, vaccines are a medicine, and just like you need a prescription
but
to
you
get
said he's
a
disrupting.
GLP-1.
Right, you said he's disrupting, but effectively what you were hearing the Republican whip John Barrasso and the Republican Senator Bill Cassidy talk about was the interruption of the availability of vaccine. Cassidy said, I would say effectively we're denying people vaccines. So that's not Margaret Brennan, that's Bill Cassidy.
Yeah, look, I disagree, respectfully disagree. Think about this. What the CDC is now saying is you're over the age of 65, you can have the vaccine. It's interesting that the UK and France have set 75 and 80 as the age. So all you need to do is email or call your doctor's nurse and get a prescription, and you should be able to get it. If you're over the age of 6 months, it's probably a good idea to talk to your doctor. And all your nurse has to do is look at the chart and say, oh, little Johnny's got asthma, definitely needs the vaccination as well. So I think we're making this way too complicated. Why does everybody lose their minds when it comes to COVID vaccine? Why can't we let the doctor and the parents decide, let the patients decide? There's so many more important things out there we should be talking about. Chronic diseases, 20% of our adolescents have obesity, mental health problems, and are on a prescription drug. There's so many more things to talk about than just COVID vaccines.
No, but I think we're conflating a few things, including the operational aspect of this. I think people get frustrated with their insurance companies. I think people get frustrated with their pharmacies and the implementation of health policy, and you know that that's more complicated than just saying we're changing a few things here. There are big implications, and I want to talk to you about it because you said you like the MMR vaccine, you like DPT, polio, smallpox. You don't like hepatitis B, which is a liver infection, and you don't think newborn kids need to be vaccinated against it. Senator Cassidy, who's a liver doctor, said he treated poor and underserved patients and that it can be a life-altering condition for the rest of your life. So why isn't it a compelling argument to you that this should be available?
So I delivered a baby every day for 25 years. We did a hepatitis test on every one of my patients. At the time of delivery, if that mom has a negative hepatitis test, she's in a stable monogamous relationship, she's not doing IV drugs, she's not letting her baby gonna play in a sandbox full of used needles, then there's zero chance that that baby's gonna have hepatitis. Now, there's other moms or other babies that do need it, okay? We need to be more specific. We can't be overly prescriptive. If that mom has not had prenatal care, if she's an IV drug abuser, if she's not in a stable relationship, a whole lot of reasons, but we need to pick and choose. Not every baby needs a hepatitis vaccine. And especially on day number 1, what are these vaccines doing to mess with the immune system of that particular baby as well? So that's my concerns. Not every baby needs hepatitis B vaccine.
Okay, and I understand it can also be spread from in a household sharing toothbrushes or razors, or, for example, if her partner was not monogamous, the pregnant lady, for example. But I hear your point here that you want this to be more bespoke, like more picking and choosing. But others would argue here that in doing that, you're going to drive down immunization rates overall if you create broader doubt in vaccines, and that it's a slippery slope here. Are you at all concerned that that is going to be the takeaway?
Look, Anthony Fauci did more to create vaccine hesitancy than Bobby Kennedy will do in his 4 years or 8 years, however long he is as secretary. That's where the problem is. So don't blame Bobby Kennedy for the problems created by Anthony Fauci. But I'm just telling you.
I'm asking you about what you said about the hepatitis B vaccine.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wasn't talking about Bobby Kennedy or Secretary Kennedy. I was talking about you and what you said about the hepatitis B vaccine. And are you concerned that picking and choosing these things like this bespoke concept of giving more choice, that it also has the effect of undermining confidence in vaccines?
Yeah, I think this is a big difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats want a one-size-fits-all prescription for everybody. And I'm telling you, not everybody reads the book. It does exactly like that. I have confidence in doctors, in nurses, and parents and grandparents to make these decisions. I don't think that we should have one government policy that dictates every one of these vaccines. I think local policy, local schools, if they want to have requirements, what Florida did was a bridge too far.
Okay.
But how about just a little common sense? Just a little common sense would go a long ways here.
Okay, because President Trump said he had some doubts about that Florida statement you just mentioned there too, and that he likes a lot of vaccines. Before I let you go, Secretary Kennedy founded this group that is arguing that women taking Tylenol or acetaminophen might be putting their babies at risk. They claim there's a link to neurodevelopmental disorders. Would you tell a pregnant woman to take a Tylenol and not feel worried about it?
Look, Tylenol is a Category B drug. I've given it to lots of patients. It's on the approved list. But that being said, I try to tell my patients, my pregnant women, not to take anything because we don't know what we don't know. I'm very cautious. Why do 20% of our children have some type of a mental health illness right now? Why do we have so many peanut allergies? Why do we have so many people with autoimmune diseases? So we don't know. What we don't know, we don't know. And I want gold standard studies to help us figure this out and sort it out. But as far as I know, Tylenol is okay in pregnancy.
Thank you, Senator. We'll leave it there for today. We'll be right back. And we're joined now by Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth. She joins us this morning from Schaumburg, Illinois. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning.
So you attended, as I understand it, a demonstration yesterday in Chicago where thousands of people were out on the street protesting President Trump's vow to send in immigration agents. I know he's also posted on social media suggesting troops will go in. Quote, Chicago is about to find out why it is called the Department of War. Vice President Vance says there aren't plans to send in troops. Do you have concrete indication now that there are plans to do so?
Well, let's make it clear. The President of the United States essentially just declared war on a major city in his own nation. This is not normal, Margaret. This is not acceptable behavior. No, we don't have any indications of them getting ready to send troops into Chicago. In fact, I was out at Great Lakes base yesterday, Naval Training Base, and they were able to confirm that the only assistance they've been requested to provide is just office space for ICE. But that there are no barracks, no detention facilities, none of that is being requested or prepared in order to support troops into Chicago.
So, so then is this just, social media trash talk? When you say he's declaring war, is this tongue in cheek?
I think he's renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War. And did he not just say that Chicago will find out what it means to be at war? I take what the President of the United States says very seriously because that is the respect you have to give to the office. And if that's what he's declaring, then let me make it clear. It would be an illegal order to declare war on a major city, any city within the United States by the President of the United States.
Senator, I know you just mentioned you went out to the Great Lakes Naval Training Station, I should say, and you said the military leadership said they'll only get office space. ICE cannot bring in lethal munitions, and the resources will not be diverted from military training. So all of that together, did you breathe a sigh of relief and say this won't have a real impact on the military?
Well, we're going to make sure that there's not an impact on the military. We need to make sure that as you know, Great Lakes Naval Training Base is where every single recruit in the United States Navy goes through to get their basic training, and then later on some advanced training. We need to make sure that not a single dollar, not a single penny of the resources that they have that should be directed towards training our nation's sailors and making them ready to do their jobs. None of that money needs to be diverted in order to support ICE or any of Donald Trump's political theater efforts. We need to focus on making sure we turn out the very best sailors we possibly can out of the base.
So in terms of how Democrats are responding to this rhetoric, the Chicago Tribune faulted Governor Pritzker for his threats to, quote, not stand idly by if the guard went in. They wrote, what does that threat actually mean? How about a conversation before the action or the response? Because it's all potentially harmful to collective health. It sounds like there's a lot of tension here. Is there an opportunity to work with the administration to avoid making this worse?
Well, they've not responded to any of our requests. I mean, I'll give you a very concrete example. Senator Durbin, myself, Senator Schneider, Congressman Schneider, sent requests into DHS to ask them to explain what exactly are you going to be doing at Great Lakes, and can we come look at your facility so we have a better understanding of what your operations are. And they replied, no, you can't, and in fact gave their staff the day off on the day that we went to go look at the facilities and locked the doors and left the base. Basically, they fled the base. This is not the action of someone that's doing something legal or that they're proud of. They literally gave their people the day off, locked the doors, and left. Now, the Navy allowed us onto the post. They allowed us to tour the outside of the facility and also where they would be storing the non-lethal munitions. But DHS did not show up. And we certainly have sent the administration multiple inquiries about what they're planning on doing. Who are they bringing into Chicago? Are they planning to bring the National Guard in? They've done none of that. They've not even reached out to local law enforcement to try to coordinate. You know, if they were truly, truly interested in fighting crime, then they would work with local law enforcement and ask them, what do you need? What help do you need? And we've not gotten any communications or feedback from the administration whatsoever.
I want to ask you in your armed services role about what is a significant geopolitical meeting this past week. You had a lot of America's adversaries gathering together. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, all of them in Beijing. And China and Russia seem to be deepening their work together. What do you think the signal to the United States here is?
The signal to the United States is exactly what these authoritarian regimes want to send, which is that they are the new world power, that America is losing its ground, and that they have utter disrespect for the United States. I think it was very, very clear. And it doesn't escape me the fact that once this meeting happened, which was humiliating to Donald Trump, he immediately responds by saying, well, then I'm going to rename the Department of Defense the Department of War and declare war in Chicago. This is what Donald Trump does. When something bad happens to him in the news cycle, or when the Epstein victims come together and have a very emotional press conference, he changes the topic and distracts us by saying things like, I'm going to send ICE into Chicago, I'm going to do this or do that. The American people cannot be fooled. We cannot allow him to distract us from what is truly happening, which is this is a man who has driven our economy to a point where now there are more unemployed people than there are jobs. We're not selling our agricultural products overseas. And our adversaries are united against us.
Well, the unemployment rate is still low, but I hear you on a weaker than expected jobs number. Just very quickly, but there was military action taken in America's backyard by the Trump administration. Vice President Vance says killing cartel members who poison our fellow citizens is the highest and best use of our military. He was talking about a strike on a alleged drug boat off the coast of Venezuela. What do you make of that show of force?
It was an illegal move by the Trump administration. There's a thing called due process in this country, and that needed to have happened. And the fact that it happened in international waters actually opens Americans to a similar action by our adversaries. We were just talking about Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and getting together and showing a show of force against the United States. Well, there's nothing now to stop them from doing something like that against Americans in international waters, and it could be civilians, and they could say, you know what? Those were drug boats. We're just going to go ahead and blow them out of the water. He's setting a precedence here that puts Americans in danger.
Senator Duckworth, thank you for your time this morning. We'll be right back. We're back now with our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, for more insight on today's CBS News poll. So, Anthony, let's start on the economy. That jobs report for August was lower than expected. Inflation is down from its post-COVID peak, but it's still not at that 2% level the Fed wants to get it to. How are people feeling?
Earlier this week, I asked people, pick one word to describe the economy. And the top one they picked was uncertain. And you see here, I think tariffs are a big part of that. We've already seen 4 in 10 people tell us they're cutting back on spending because of increases from prices that they see as part of tariffs. They think tariffs are going to raise prices in both the short term and the long term. And part of that is support for imposing new tariffs has been ticking down. It is now down again, increasingly confined just to the president's base, to Republicans. Now, there is their view that it will ultimately increase manufacturing jobs in the U.S., that people ought to be willing to pay a little bit more to support President Trump's policies, but that view has not permeated beyond that base to the wider public, Margaret.
And we might need to wait until we see that job growth in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, it could be in some ways that pullback a little bit of a leading indicator as we go forward, right? People spending. The other part of this, too, is more broadly, when we talk about who and where you can impose tariffs, when we talk about influence on the Federal Reserve, a presidential influence there, the lens of this is also about presidential power and how much influence a president can have over those levers on the economy. And, I asked about this a little, and what we're seeing is Republicans very comfortable with Donald Trump having those levers. Other Americans, not so much.
But that's unusual for conservatives in particular, who have for so long trumpeted free market economy, not a centrally planned one. So really liking that there is such control in the hands of a political leader is really unusual. That's a change.
Well, it is, in the sense that if you look back at polling over generations, you would see Republicans, free market, less government control. Here, so much of it, like so many things, centers around their trust in President Trump for that. But you also see some of those splits within Republicans where the MAGA base, they describe it as being efficient, and many others describing it as, you're right, just more control.
And it is that MAGA base that has reshaped the entire party. So that's what we mean, really, when we talk Republican these days. Let me ask you about the National Guard. This does seem to unify Republicans, if I understand it from your polling, the focus on immigration and law enforcement, this surge of federal resources to D.C. He's talking about Portland and Chicago and Boston and Baltimore. What's the perception of it?
Well, the lens on this touches on views of crime and what is effective at fighting crime, but also on rights and freedoms. Yes, for proponents of this, many of them Republicans, they're saying it's effective about fighting crime. They say they'd support deploying the National Guard to other cities, like you mentioned, even to their own area, whether there's Democratic-run areas or Republican-run areas. But for the majority who are in opposition to this, in principle, they say, well, it's going to impose on rights and freedoms. It's going to make those rights and freedoms less secure, here again, through the lens of presidential power. The public generally would see sort of the local leaders, the governor, and the president all involved. One thing to note, I think it's related, speaking of the Republican base, the president's overall approval rating is ticked up from July. It's up 2 points, and it's stabilized after having steadily declined over those early weeks and months of his term. That's really helped by Republicans. And you look at how people evaluate the president. Republicans say they're evaluating him more on immigration, deportation, crime, those issues. People who are evaluating him more on the economy, on inflation, give him overall lower ratings.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment. It's a sad morning for those of us here at Face the Nation as we learned that the longtime associate director, Mary Frances Surian, has passed away. She was here with a smile on her face every Sunday morning for decades before she retired in 2020. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.